I'd like to yield 5 minutes to the author of this bill that we're considering today, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger.
I think my colleague from Louisiana, and Madam Speaker, I rise in support of my bill, H.R. 192, that would prohibit individuals who are not citizens of the United States from voting in elections in the District of Columbia. And I think there has been a lot of talk about our founding fathers, and I'd just like to point out that I think one of the things that they envisioned was a healthy, functioning republic with accountability, but with D.C. at the epicenter, and D.C. not being a state, but being a district, because they knew that that would change the dynamics of this place. And so I, like many others, think that this federal district is very special, and it's worth having the accountability, and that accountability is here in the United States Congress. It is Congress, through the Constitution, that our founders entrusted the care of D.C. and specifically, quote, exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over the district. And Washington, D.C. is going through a tough time. It's not been going well in the last couple of years. In fact, let me just point out that in 2023, this was the deadliest year on record in Washington, D.C. 274 people were killed. Violent crime spiked by nearly 40%. There were proceedings that even the mayor opposed that had to do with violent crime, that had to do with carjackings, that had to do with lowering the penalties and the thresholds and making it a little bit easier, a strategy of appeasement that even the mayor opposed. And in this Congress last year, we acted and we did something. What we did was we said, no, Washington, D.C., you're not going to lower those penalties for things like carjackings. Oh, you'll never get that through the Senate. Well, guess what? The Senate passed it and President Biden signed it into law because he said that's ridiculous that you would reduce accountability measures in the District of Columbia. And so here we are. And in this case, the D.C. City Council has made a very short-sighted decision that I fear could be a harbinger around the country. And that decision, I believe, lessens and cheapens citizenship. We see that in other areas. But the D.C. City Council has moved to allow non-citizens, including illegal aliens and foreign agents, to vote in local D.C. elections. In fact, not only are they allowed to vote, they're being encouraged. You can look at this flyer right here. This was just sent out by Washington, D.C. to encourage people to vote. Yes, there may be 500 who are registered. This is a year old, but there are 50,000, according to Washington, D.C. statistics, that are eligible. They're encouraging people to vote for mayor, for attorney general, for members of the State Board of Education, and more. And some may argue that, yes, these are just local elections. Well, they're democratic elections that regularly determine taxation, the criminal code that I just referenced, and the election of the various city council members who decide ordinances like who gets to vote. Not to mention that many of these are decided by close margins. And I find it inconceivable that the city council and now other city councils around the United States would intentionally dilute the voting power of their constituents for non-citizens who otherwise might not meet the requirements, might not pay taxes, might not be members of the community that want the same things as those who are citizens. And therefore, I believe it is cheapening and lessening citizenship. As the capital of our democracy, Washington, D.C. ought to be leading the way, setting the example, not incentivizing the exact practices that our adversaries would relish. Take a look at what happened in San Francisco, where they just swore in somebody who is not a citizen to be an election administrator. The election administrator will administrate elections in that part of California, not just for local and municipal elections, but all the elections. Let's look beyond the Democrats' call for this bill to be deemed discriminatory or false claims about its intended purpose. I'm asking my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to look ahead, to put citizenship back in its rightful place as the gold standard. Free and fair elections are a prerequisite for a healthy republic. I believe that's what our founders intended, and non-citizen voting, whether it's 1 vote or 1 million votes, dilutes the voting power of the citizen. I believe Congress must act clearly and decisively to bar non-citizens from voting in any election, including in Washington, D.C., and I urge my colleagues to support my resolution. With that, I yield back.